Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining GBR. Welcome, everyone. We're going to give folks a couple of minutes and then we'll begin.
And for those of you that are already on, we are going to ask that folks stop their video because we had some bandwidth problems at the last one. So if you can do that, those of you, not our presenters, but our other folks that are joining, please do that. We appreciate it.
She'll be sitting on a swing in the sun, making stones turn to bone.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get rolling here. Welcome to the Green Business Roundtable. Really appreciate you being here. Today's topic is planning for affordability and resilience in the changing West. And if you get a chance, please say hello to people in the chat. So, just introduce yourself there so everyone kind of knows who's here. It's kind of hard to keep track otherwise. We will have questions and announcements. If you have any announcements to make, please send a message to me and or Susan and Eder in the chat, and then we'll have those. The questions we can do just by doing a hand raise after we finish the presentations. If you have any issues technically, please contact Susan, and especially if you have problems with Zoom. And we're asking everybody to turn off their videos, all the people who are participating, because we had some issues with bandwidth at our last virtual GBR, so we want to be sure we don't run into that issue. So this is the virtual GBR, and the goal of the Green Business Roundtable is to inspire, educate, improve, and network. The parent organization for GBR is the San Juan Citizens Alliance. A number of our employees are on this now, including me. I am the wildlife program manager for the San Juan Citizens Alliance, and have been lucky enough to be doing this piece, taking over for Kent Ford, who did just a marvelous job on GBR over the years. So if you're not a member of the San Juan Citizens Alliance, as I always say, I don't know why, and you should be. So give locally, become a member, and we are the local leader regionally for clean air, pure water, healthy lands, and wildlife. Wanted to extend a big thank you to our sponsors. First Southwest Bank is our premier sponsor, but others include LPEA, Drea Presley from Edward Jones, Maria's Bookshop, Phoenix Recycling, Alpine Bank, the City of Durango, Durango Land and Homes, Local First, Durango Nursery and Supply, the Payroll Department, Powerhouse Science Museum, SolarWorks, and Mantel Heckathorn Builders. So a big thanks to all of them. We appreciate their support for GBR. So the next GBR, the upcoming two in March and April. In March, it'll be sustainability initiatives in the 9R school district. And that'll be Karen Chesser, who is the superintendent of Durango 9R. And then in April, Achieving a Carbon Neutral Electric Future. Don Harms from La Plata Electric will be making that presentation. We will have, of course, our last of the season will be in May. We don't have that one scheduled yet, but we'll shortly. So today, the topic again is planning for affordability and resilience in the changing West. Our guest speakers are Donald Elliott, who's from Clarence Associates, followed by Scott Shine of the city of Durango. We will have the presentations ending at about 12:45 and then have questions and answers available, or the opportunity for questions and answers then for Don and Scott. And again, if you have any announcements, please send those to me and or Susan Etter in the chat, and then we will have some time for those at the end if we have any. So Don Elliott is a nationally recognized high-energy urban planner, lawyer, and solver of complex governance challenges. He's the director with Clarence Associates Limited, a national land use consulting firm based out of Denver. He has assisted with over 45 U.S. communities to date to update development regulations with a particular focus on fair and affordable housing strategies. He's the author of A Better Way to Zone, co-author of The Rules That Shape Urban Form and the Citizens Land Planning, and has served as the editor of the Colorado Land Planning and Development Law Group for over 25 years. And with that, Don, please take it away, share your screen, and continue on.
All right, let's see if you can see this screen now. Can you see it?
Yep, looks good. Thanks, Don.
All right. So yeah, I get a lot of ragging about that high energy piece. That was actually a joke that we put in. We were trying to update our resumes, and somebody said, "Oh, just say you're high energy." So okay, fine. Now it gets quoted back to me all the time. We have a short presentation here, as was explained. I'd like to get going right away, so we cover as much as possible as we can in the next 30 minutes, and then try to finish in about 30 minutes, so we can turn it over to Scott and then hear your questions. So basically, I'm a director with Clarence Associates. Some of you may know our firm. We work all over the country. We're based in Denver. We have an office in Chapel Hill, but at last count, we have worked with over 220 communities across the US and Canada, basically doing planning, neighborhood planning. We do not do entitlement planning. We do not get projects approved. We rewrite plans for neighborhoods, communities, sustainability, housing, environment, and we turn them into law and incentives and get rid of old laws. And that's what I have spent my career doing, is basically saying, okay, what part of your inspiring vision for the community could be turned into incentives or laws or better procedures, or getting rid of barriers in the law that would allow you to make it happen. So I consider myself a plan implementer. I would like to talk very briefly, you can tell in 30 minutes, this is a lot to cover, but I want to talk a little bit about major trends just to frame it. It is important, I think, especially these days, to keep in mind what the world is doing around us. And I won't, after this one time, I will not mention the word COVID, because I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about other major trends in the global economy. Then affordability, then resilience, which I said I would talk about. I do want to gratuitously work in equity. A buzzword, some people may be tired of it. We should be tired of it when we've done something meaningful about it, because we haven't yet. And then how zoning will need to evolve. So what's going on here, guys? You should know all of these things, but I want to frame it. People are continuing to move south and west in the country. That's the geographical center of the country is on the right-hand image. Every single decade, it moves south and west. Yes. Are they going to stop coming because we're short on water? Nope. Are we going to keep getting pressure to occupy environmentally sensitive lands? Yes. Are they going to be older? Yes. Are they going to be more diverse? Yes. And the closer people live together, the more what you do concerns your neighbor, and they are going to ask for some rules to keep you from throwing your elbows around and you say, hey, that was fine when I lived in Wyoming. No offense to Wyoming. That's right, because you had no neighbors, but now you do. And we're seeing that all over the country. Why are the East and West Coast more regulated? Because they woke up socialist? No, they're not socialist. They woke up more concerned about what their neighbors do because they live closer to their neighbors. That trend is going to continue. You know this, but The World is Flat is a great book about the world economy. So the idea that you can stop the flow of money into housing in Durango bidding up prices, not likely to be true. That you could stop people moving in and working from Durango because they live in California or Texas, not likely to be true. Information moves. If you make your living hoarding information, you're in a difficult situation because the information has become very freely exchangeable. We have a lot of people who produce in the global economy. I am a patriot, but I will tell you, if you're expecting US dominance in the world economy to rise, you are mistaken. It's not happening. So we are going to work in an increasingly globally competitive environment. And that means, among other things, that government is going to get continued pressure to be more efficient and more predictable, more transparent, do its job better and faster, because that will enable people to earn livings and afford housing. So I also want to point out there's a risk here of the informal job sector, which can threaten your revenues. This is a map around the world of the percentage of the workforce that is not registered, not organized, not taxed. That's a problem for local governments. We can admire freelance, the gig economy, people who are kind of under the radar. A couple of them doesn't matter. A lot of them matters a lot, because if they're not registered, we can't tell, and we can't see, we can't guide who's in it, and we also can't mitigate the negative impacts they have on their neighbors. But also, you can't tax and regulate them. And so if more and more and more people work informally, and in some countries, it's the vast majority of people. Try running a government when you don't know who's doing what or where they're doing it from, or the ability to collect taxes to pay for the services they consume. They're cool about flying under the radar for paying taxes, but they still draw on the police and the fire and the schools and everybody else. And so this is a danger in the modern economy, is that we're going to get more and more people working informally. And if we make it too hard to work formally, they will work informally. And now you've got a bigger problem than you had before. Many of the self-employed, we're seeing more and more people working from home. These are just a couple of years old data, but of those who work for themselves and work at home, 64% of them were, of those who work for themselves, 64% work from home. You can tell where this needle is moving. We're going to have more and more of the population working from home. And this was true before COVID. This has nothing to do with COVID. This number and these graphs come before COVID. If anything, those charts have gone up. So think about that when you think housing, jobs, restraints you're going to put on home occupations. They're going to do it. They're either going to do it legally because you made it okay, or they're going to do it illegally. That's the bottom line. So be careful about saying, I don't want them doing that. Well, there are a lot of things they're going to do because they got to do it. And if you make it too hard, they're going to do it anyway. So I want to talk about these three-legged, I said four-legged stool. I had a fourth topic, and then I thought, I better cut one off. So it's actually a three-legged stool, but I didn't change the graphic. Affordability, sustainability, resilience, and equity. So here's equity. You guys know this chart. This is sales price of a house and income. Every time I look up a new chart, it's worse than the one before. It is not cyclical. This is a structural problem of the US economy because of global competition. We do not pay, we have an increasing share of the population that cannot afford to rent or buy. We have set the economy up to do that. It will continue to do that. It will continue to get worse. There are really only a couple things you can do about it. One is to try to remove the barriers, so you're not raising the cost of building housing. You do not have much control over wages. You can't control that blue line. You have some control over the red line. So I spend a lot of time working on that. So here's an arrow graph about affordable housing. I'm into affordability now. In the blue part of this, generally speaking, these are very low income folks. We could argue about the numbers, 30%, 60%, 80% AMI. In general, in those areas, you're going to have to pour money on this problem. In the red part of the arrow, the market can house these people. And I view my job, but they overlap. And I view my job as trying to move that red arrow to the left, to allow the private market to do more of the housing market, because we will never have enough money to subsidize housing. We are so far from the countries that do a good job providing affordable housing in terms of how much money they spend out of their national economy to do just that. We're politically unprepared to do it. It'd be fine if we were. I would be quite happy, actually. But the bottom line is we're not, and we show no inclination of being willing to do that. So what do? You try to remove barriers and come up with other ways of doing it, but there's a limit. No matter what you do with zoning, you can't move kind of into that pure blue part of this arrow. Zoning tricks, density, parking, lot coverage, inclusionary zoning. They cannot move it past a certain point because there's not enough gas in the engine to subsidize what you're trying to subsidize. It's going to take, to be honest, tax money or tax relief or LIHTC or something. But the bottom line is the fact that you can never cover the left hand of the spectrum without real money, that we appear to be unwilling to raise out of ourselves, doesn't mean it's not worthwhile moving that red arrow as far to the left as possible so you can let the private market handle as much of it as possible. So let's see if I can get this to move. There we go. These are all things under discussion. Zoning for affordability. Every single zoning project I have, I counted up the other, I've got like 13 going on right now, 10 are active. And they're all considering all of these things, reducing the size of residential lots, duplex, triplex, fourplex units being allowed on single family lots, sometimes with conditions. In many places, it's only duplex. In some, it's triplex. Accessory dwelling units, cottage housing, courtyard apartments, zoning more land for multifamily, and getting rid of special permitting requirements, allowing the by right conversion of commercial buildings into residential. And then to some communities are saying, look, I'm going to put an overlay zone on this neighborhood because it is 1,000 square foot bungalows. If they go in favor of 3,000 square foot mansions, we'll never get them back. And the rents will never get back there. We would have given away through zoning something we can only make up again through real cash money. And we can't do that. So we're protecting those. Inclusionary zoning, meaning requiring people to set aside a certain amount of their new housing product at a certain level of affordability. That used to be legal in Colorado for ownership only as of the 2021 legislative session. It's now legal for rental too. So you can do that. There are neighborhoods doing that. And then, of course, reducing parking requirements. I don't really, I mean, I'm going to put them over here and talk about this. These are the kinds of things people are talking about. Shared driveways, loop lanes, sharing open space so that each lot can have less open space. And it raises lots of concerns. Monotony, it's all boring. The only way to do this is to make them all look alike, and we're tired of it. It's not our community. But it does increase supply. So I've given you the one-word response to the concerns that come up. It's got to lower their property values to have more houses on less land. Usually not true. Most of the studies don't show that. Monotony, units are still not affordable. I'm going to go to the top bullet again. Guys, there's two issues going on here. A, we probably need a lot more housing actually deed restricted for people at lower income, because otherwise they'll always be outbid by people with more money than they do. So if you really mean to house your workforce, you're going to have some deed restricted, income restricted units. But the other part of the puzzle is expanding housing supply. And we hear this all over the West. I'm kind of tired of this debate. Yes, you're increasing housing supply, but it's all wealthy housing. Yes, that's true. It costs a lot of money to build new housing, but it is increasing the housing supply. And I think I'll just say this, increasing the housing supply will not solve this problem. But there is no solution to this problem that doesn't involve increasing the housing supply. You need to increase it, and for market rate units to loosen up the market, and you need to have some tricks to try to income restrict some of that for the lower end of the market. That kind of, oh, I'd prefer to loosen up the private markets. Oh, I think we should be focusing on income restrictions. They're both true. And it's a false dichotomy to say we get to choose which one of these we're doing. Most places have to do both. There's no place to play on the lot. Well, we're seeing more and more site plans with shared open space rather than individual open space. And then maintenance. Gee, who's going to take care of all these small lots? Beware, that's a problem. Beware of over-relying and saying, we'll just let the HOA do it. If you're setting aside housing that is deliberately for people who are leveraged and they don't have a lot of discretionary income, guess what they're not going to pay? They're not going to pay their HOA dues, and that's not going to happen. And so these are concerns, but I want to be even more bold than that. The usual concerns are, yeah, you know what? We've always been a kind of a low density place, and this just doesn't fit with our neighborhood character. Guess what? Neighborhood character is going to have to change. It's that simple. We cannot keep doing what we're doing, the way we're doing it, failing to subsidize through tax money and keep the zoning the same because of neighborhood character and say, I hope this problem solves itself some way. It's either zoning or money. And if you're not willing to raise money, then you got to change zoning. And if you change zoning, you're going to change neighborhood character, swallow hard, have a thoughtful discussion, find the least bad way to do that, and do it. There are lots of ways to get at the monotony issue. Housing types. This is, I think, out of Aurora, their code that we wrote a few years ago. They got really into the details on this, saying, we'll let you do a lot of density, but you're going to mix it up in terms of the types of units you're creating. Colorado Springs is doing the same thing. I want to say a word about tiny houses in short, because I don't want to take too much time. It's not going to solve this problem. They're cute as all get out. Guess what? They're RVs. RVs are regulated for safety as you drag them down the road. The fact that it has a sticker from the Recreational Vehicle Industry Association, RVIA, doesn't mean you can live in it long-term. I can take questions on this if you want. I like them too. I've stayed in one. I have written codes that accommodate them. This is not going to make a significant contribution to the affordable housing question. One of the issues is regulation. To make a long story short, you need to meet a long-term building code. That's either the Manufactured Housing Association codes for manufactured homes or your local building code. Most tiny houses meet neither one of them. In America, and one of the reasons we have a healthy population, as healthy as we do, is that we won't let you live long-term in a place that's not safe to live. And the way we regulate that is building codes. So when you say, I will let you put this on a foundation and hook it up to utilities, and you can live in it long-term, if it meets the building code, about 2/3 of the people go away because they don't meet, oh, I've got a sticker from the RVIA. Yeah, that means it's safe to drag onto the lot. That doesn't mean it's safe to live long-term. Zoning has got a lot of issues. And I think I'll go in here. What if you want to zone for tiny houses? The last two were, you want to allow them to be subdivisions or private covenants. Those make it much more complicated. I can't talk about those today in light of the time. The issue is, assuming you're dealing with tiny homes and they need a building code for long-term occupancy, most codes don't address them. Even in codes that I have written recently, we don't call them that. We just call them a house. There's no minimum size on a house. But you mean you're only permitted if you are in an RV park, or you remove the wheels, install on a foundation, hook up to community water, sewer, and electric. Presumably, you could do it in any place. You could regulate this. I'll allow them as accessory dwelling units, but not as primary dwelling units. I'll allow them in this zone district, but not in that zone district. But the point is, that bottom bullet, that's what most communities do when they allow this. When you do that, these things sell for $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. When you put it on a lot, ignore the land costs and hook it up to utilities and pay the fees, you're into it over 100 grand. For that 100 grand, you could probably do a better job housing people and they would have more than 400 square feet to live in. That is why, sorry guys to offend people, I think these are cool as all get out, but they're not a significant source of major housing supply. So if you're going to do it, you got to talk about in which zone districts you permit them or not permit them. Will they be primary or accessory? Will they be allowed in neighborhoods mingled with non-tiny houses? Or are you creating little enclaves where people are able to do these? Or do you want to allow people to have several on one lot, like a building group? Or do you want to make them subdivide? If you make them subdivide, you've got to get into your subdivision regulations, which will generally make it, because of the width of roads, the type of utilities, the type of grades and turning radiuses, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. This is why the longer you look at tiny houses, the less you say, this is probably a great solution. I'm moving on to sustainability and resilience. I want to talk briefly about sustainability and briefly about how to contain this conversation. Then I'll really talk about resilience. So for the last 20 years, guys, every RFP, every request for proposals from a community that wants to rewrite its development codes that I have seen says, make us more sustainable, make us more resilient. Did it go away in the 2008 recession? Nope. Did it go away during COVID? Nope. It is a trend in the entire country. But what can zoning do? And the short answer is, I'm going to green them in here. Some part of this zoning can do, some parts of it, the connection is so indirect that you'd be better off choosing another tool. But basically, this is what zoning can do. So I'm put Al Gore's picture up there. You may like him, you may not like him. He persuaded a lot of America that this is real and that we should be doing something about it. So I don't worship Al Gore, but I will tell you, the world changed about 20 years ago when this stuff came out, and it has not changed back. It's highlighted in the papers, and we can argue about it endlessly, but every single request from a local government I get to rewrite their code says, we want what you can do reasonably and within our budget to make this happen. So renewable energy, circulation connectivity, public health and exercise, making things more walkable, allowing local healthy food supplies, and waste and recycling. These are basically things that you can do. What are the things that people are doing to head towards sustainability? Then I'll get into resilience. Mixed use is a big one, guys, and it's not hard. Planners and zoners created the separation of uses. We can erase the lines with political support that we drew decades ago. Every community we work in is saying, yes, there are some neighborhoods that are only for living, but the vast majority of our neighborhoods, other than industry on one end and some residential on the other end, we're going to allow you to work or build in this neighborhood, work or live. Different types of mixed use. Do you have to mix it? Usually not. Can you mix it? Yes. Does that mean anybody's going to want to live where they work? I don't want to live near where I work. I get it. You don't have to. You're opening up opportunities for people who do want to live closer to where they work to drive less. That's all you got to do. And it's very powerful. People do drive less when you give them more opportunities to live near where they're going to work. We can talk about autonomous vehicles. It's going to change it to some degree. It's not going to reverse the curve completely. Sometimes people are requiring minimum densities. They're cutting parking. These are all things that are trying to get at emissions and driving and absorption of carbon dioxide. More and more places in the West are saying we're going to limit your irrigated turf to reduce water consumption. We're going to manage stormwater on site through virus whales, or we're going to have you treat all your stormwater on site. And then there are point systems, and I can talk about them. I'm happy to answer questions on any of these things. Every community comes up with a different list. Usually we provide a list of, well, you could do A through Z, and they said, we're willing to talk about A through G. A lot of these things don't resonate in our community. The point is they all contribute to these solutions. Here's an example from Bloomington, Indiana, where I have a couple slides. They basically come up and give you points. When you earn points in Bloomington, and this is one way to give them, is by getting different levels of LEED certification. And the other way is saying, I hate LEED and I don't like the LEED alternatives in the right-hand column. So you got to do 5 out of these 7 things, and they're defined in the code. And if you do 5 out of 7, you get a bonus. What's the bonus? Bonus is an additional floor on your building. Downtown, it's an additional 2 floors on your building. It's a major contributor to performance. And it's an incentive point system that is very common these days when you talk about sustainability. Well, won't they always choose the cheapest thing to do? Not necessarily. Some will choose the cheapest ones. That's okay. That's what builders do. They're supposed to be efficient. But sometimes they will choose the one that they want to lease to. There are corporations out there that will only lease LEED buildings. If you're building for those corporations, you're going to try to satisfy their leasing criteria by building a building that satisfies them, even if it's not the cheapest thing you can do. That's your market. And so, but the point is, here's a pure LEED-based system, and here's a mixed system. They're both options that you can do in Bloomington to earn significant things. NORFOLK, I want to trade. I'm going on to resilience now because we get a lot of talk about that. In the east, it's sea level rise. In the west, it's wildfire and stream and other floodings and heat islands. Our firm wrote a code for Norfolk, Virginia the other day that won some awards in Virginia. It's very innovative in the sense that Norfolk has water running in the streets every time there's a high tide every month. And they have the Navy base. And the Navy base, they can't let it go away because it's the entire economy. It's not going to go away. But the sea level rise is flooding the city. And they had to come up with a very innovative program, a point system. And it basically, I'm not going to ask you to read all these. This is an example out of the code for non-residential development. It basically says, you need to earn a certain number of points. How do you earn points? By building on the high land. I own low land. Well, one of their options is the people in the areas that will not be flooded for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, can buy out the development rights of those in low-lying areas. They've created a system by which you need to earn points. I'm not telling you what you have to do. I'm telling you, you got to do a certain amount of points. And one of the ways you do points is to build more resiliently, and they've got whole tables to explain this. Or the other way is help use your own money to reduce the risk that other people are going to build in low-lying areas. Here are a couple of tables. I don't expect you to be able to read them. I'm just pointing out that there are tables, and we've written these kinds of things for Duluth, Minnesota, for a variety of different places, where the bottom line is, give people choices. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Could you argue forever about it? Absolutely, but not on my budget. I'm going to say, look, you guys sit down, we agree, we'll look at it, review. You come up with a table. If the table's not right and you're over rewarding some things and under rewarding others, you can amend it next year. It's just a zoning ordinance, amend it next year. But the point is, you need to offer flexibility, and then you need to offer something that's really aimed at reducing risk. So wildfire, we have the Marshall fire to talk about, but we also have other fires. Colorado's had endless wildfires. People kind of say, isn't that a wake-up call? And I say, we have had wake-up calls ever since I've lived in Colorado for 30 years. We just don't like to hear the alarm. They say, oh, that's terrible. We should do something about it. And then we wait for the next fire to happen. And so this is a paraphrase from Molly Mowry, who's Wildfire Planning International. She used to work for our firm. Now she has an independent firm, and she does a lot of consulting. And we asked her, this NORFOLK thing we wrote is based on sea level rise. How would you think about turning that into a resilience issue for the West for wildfire? And in broad strokes, this is a presentation she and I made some years ago. She's basically saying, this is what you need to do. First of all, look at the maps. There are maps of wildfire risks out there. The town of Castle Rock just adopted a plan that divides Castle Rock, not a very big community, into 19 different risk zones. This is not rocket science, guys. It's like floodplains. We can map it. Are the maps right? Nope. Are they better than not having maps? Yep. Do they get better over time? Yep. So look at the maps, figure out what percentages and what parts of your community are in fire risk areas, control the land use in those areas. But they got property rights. They sure do. But that doesn't mean the right to do everything you thought you could do when you bought the property. It also doesn't mean the right to do things that hurt the risk for your neighbors, and it never has. Long before zoning, nuisance said you can't use your property in a way that creates additional risk for your neighbors. So control the land uses, control the size of houses, control the spacing of houses. I've worked in places that have said, I worked in Hawaii where they're trying to control for lava flow, and they said, you know what, we'll let you build a house, but the biggest size is 800 square feet, 600 square feet. Why? Well, you're in a lava flow area. Well, I know that this was a dream house. It's my dream house. I had a 4,000 square foot house in mind. We're not going to let you do that. Well, an 800 square foot house is a cabin. Yes, it is. I won't be able to live there full time. That's right. I'm going to sue you for a taking. Probably going to lose on that one. And we can talk about more if you want. So control land uses, build properly, ensure you have water firefighting access, manage the vegetation. And then, yeah, that's kind of like basic, everybody does this. And then you add points on top, site assessments, creating defensible space, allowing it. A lot of fire spreads through accessory buildings, porches, patios, sheds. Apply it to them. Do development agreements to manage it, and then store firewood safely. So about 2 more minutes and I'll be quiet. This is important, guys. Equity is not just a matter of George Floyd. Equity is a serious problem. If you haven't read The Color of Law, you should read it. It is about the embeddedness of racial and ethnic discrimination in our system of laws, and it draws a very direct line from the origins of zoning to land use zoning. It began as racially overt zoning. You cannot live in this neighborhood if you're Black. Courts overruled that, not because it was unfair to minorities, but because it interfered with contract rights, ironically. But they made it illegal. And soon after that, we went down the road for land use zoning. So be careful. There's a tie to what I've spent my career doing, which I think is a very powerful tool for neighborhoods, and very direct forms of racism in this country. So facially neutral rules don't mean it's fair. It's not. And basically, women-headed households, people experiencing disabilities, historically marginalized groups, are always the ones that pay the disproportionate price for whatever restrictions we put on the property. So once again, I just want to point out, because these groups, those with disabilities, women and marginalized groups, always earn less money. That doesn't mean every single one of them. It means you can predict There's a disproportionate amount of these groups that are in low income categories. When you raise the price of development, you are disproportionately affecting those groups. Don't go home and ignore that fact. You can decide what you want to do about it. But when you say single family only zoning, you are disparate. It sounds perfectly neutral racially, and you know exactly who's going to be hurt. Those with less income who are disproportionately in these three groups. Raising minimum lot sizes, lowering lot coverages, raising the infrastructure requirements, raising the parking requirements. Just think hard when you say, we're trying to make a better community. We're going to up the landscaping standards. Just don't go home and look the other way and say, gee, it sounds fair to me. It's not fair. And we all need to find that balance, but do it with one eye on the fact that we have been for 100 years creating disproportionate impacts on poor people who tend to be in historically marginalized groups by doing this stuff. So I'm going to do three things and I'll be quiet. We're going to allow how zoning going to have to evolve. Mixed use is happening everywhere. Think about it hard. It's not easy. We'll do it. We're going to allow more mixing of use, including services, because we're all growing older and lots of things are going to be allowed to be closer to the neighborhoods than they were before. And finally, people are going to be living in smaller spaces. They're going to be using storage. They're going to be doing other things, but we're going to continue to have third places, meeting places, communal open spaces, just because the economy is driving us into less private spaces that serve those functions. And my wife loves Starbucks. I'm not addicted to Starbucks, but I used it as a symbol. The point, and this is not going on with COVID. If you think COVID turned all the curves on their backs, you're wrong. There are going to be impacts. We're still figuring out what they are, but these trends that I've given you are very real, and they remain real. I hope I've provoked some conversation, and I hope we have some good questions. But in the meantime, I'll turn it over to Scott, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, Don. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. Scott Shine with the City of Durango Community Development Department. I have had the privilege over the years to see Don speak multiple times, and he always brings the heat. He always is thought-provoking and always is on top of trends, and really has been a leader in our field for a long time. So it's great that Green Business Roundtable was able to bring Don virtually to Durango, and hope we have a lot of time to hear more from him and respond to your questions. So the typical approach here would be for me to jump in and start to laundry list all of the things that the City of Durango is doing to address affordability and become more resilient. And I certainly could do that. There's no shortage of things that I could share, number of programs and things. That would probably be a whole nother 30, 45 minutes, maybe longer. So I've chosen not to do that. And I want to focus more on what we're doing to really make our organization and the people, the workforce in Durango resilient and effective in order to be able to accomplish these aspirations to address affordability and become more resilient. Quickly, are you seeing my slide? If I could get a verbal or a heads up from somebody, they're coming through. Good, okay. So I'm gonna go through this quick because we do have the hard stop at 12:45 and wanna provide time for questions. But as we think about how do we achieve these things that require great leadership, foresight, consensus building, those types of things, there's been a lot of effort to think about the city becoming much more high performing, resilient, and effective in our work. And that starts by really honing in on why we exist and where we're headed, what we want to accomplish. And I think many of you are familiar with this strategic plan that the council has led formation of. Jose Madrigal, our new city manager, has led this effort, and it's really helping bring that clarity of purpose. And, fortunately and tellingly, sustainability, equity, efficiency, quality of life are all integrated into these very high level statements that are guiding our work. There are 6 primary objectives in the strategic plan. I won't go into these in a lot of detail, but again, I just want you to notice, livability, sense of place, environmental, social, sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, affordability, economic opportunity. That's integrated into the very fabric of what we're shooting for and striving for, and informs all of our work day in and day out, from very high level things to the very minutia of zoning ordinances and fence permits and sign permits and processes about development review and public hearings are all being shaped by these objectives in the strategic plan. So as we identify these goals, we want to be pursuing them with excellence. And so we are focusing a lot on these 3 components that lead to organizational excellence. We can have all of the sort of nice strategic language that we want, but if we don't have an engaged workforce, if we're not delivering the services in a way that's satisfying and meeting our community's needs, we're not going to get there. So we're honing in on what does it mean to be a high-performing organization and deliver these things, again, with excellence. And a resilient and effective organization is made up of resilient and effective individuals. And so there's a lot of work being done. Again, a little glimpse behind the curtain for you all, not something we really lead with usually about how we're addressing community priorities, but this is really at the foundation of how we're going to get to these things. How do we develop staff to be able to identify these needs and then be able to address them? And you'll notice in these 12 attributes that are going to be how we develop our staff and build leaders within the organization. Resilience is one of those very goals that we're shooting for in individuals. So all of that is sort of at a citywide level, and just drilling down a little bit more into community development. We've recently done some reorganization in our department, and I'm really excited to be able to share that this whole component of housing affordability, sustainability, economic opportunity, which includes equity, job creation, quality of life, community character, has really been called out specifically as a main area of focus for what we do. We also have the more typical or traditional development services around permitting, compliance with zoning ordinances, building and inspections, those types of things. But we're really calling out these more aspirational long-range planning objectives as a key part of what we do. And then to make sure that there's an interface between these long-range plans and the very detailed laws that Don talked about, that he's worked on, the zoning code, building code, those types of things. We have a working group that's done a lot to, we call it the Code Alignment Working Group, to bring these high-level visions and missions and objectives and really start to integrate them into the detail of standards and regulations. And we're really happy they've been able to accomplish a lot. We did some major upgrades to our parking standards. We did some electric vehicle updates to make sure we're staying on trend with those issues. A number of other smaller things that, again, relate to how actual projects are getting built in our community in a way that achieve these affordability and resiliency goals. Happy to talk more about this, but this has been an exciting process to really hone in on who we are as a department, what our staff is focusing on, and spending time making a priority. So with that, I wanted to spend some time just gauging the sentiment of this group, and I'm going to stop my share now, and we're going to wrap up with a few poll questions. A bit of a disclaimer on these. This is just to gauge sentiment of this group. They're not the be all end all of what's going to happen in the future, or defining the work program for the community development department. It's just a way to outreach, engage you all on a lot of the information you've just heard from Don quickly, and get your sentiments. And then we'll stop and allow time for question and answer. So I'm going to launch this poll. And you should see 3 questions that you can move through. We're able to see on our end how many people have completed the poll. So first one relates to threats to quality of life, prosperity, viability of the Durango community and the surrounding region. What would you identify as the top threat to those components of our community? Second, relates to what initiatives, what approach would really, in your mind, have the biggest impact on housing affordability and availability in Durango? And then lastly, what is the most pressing resilience challenge? And again, there's a lot of things on here. You could probably have a list of about 25 different factors. We landed where we did just, again, to get a high level picture of what the community thinks as represented by Green Business Roundtable. And I'm interested to see all your input. And again, appreciate San Juan Citizen Alliance hosting this forum. They do a great job. Look forward to answering some questions, hearing more from Don, and hopefully engaging in a forum where we have time to drill a little bit more into the details on what the city and our partners are doing to address affordability and resilience. Would be happy to come back to Green Business Roundtable to touch on that if that would be a good fit. So thank you. And
this is Gary. We're not seeing the questions yet. At least I'm not.
Okay. I'm seeing we've got Gary. I think hosts are not able to participate in the polls, but we've got 43 of 54 people have voted.
Good enough. Thank you.
I'll talk to you afterwards, Gary, and you can give me your feedback on the questions. But so we got 83% have voted. We're making good headway. Kind of spread out on different things. Clear leader on the first question. Couple front runners on the second question, and yeah, same on the last, kind of a top 3 that are closely grouped. So got 92% participation. Probably give it about 10 more seconds and we'll close it. %. And I'm going to go ahead and end the polling here. Great. And I'm going to go ahead and share results. And Gary or Kent, whoever wants to kind of do some announcements and wrap up or facilitate Q&A, go for it.
Okay, well, thanks, Scott, and thanks, Don. Thank both of you for your presentations. Scott, I assume you want to do a quick announcement of just what those results are. Is that what you wanted to do here in a bit?
Yeah, I'm sharing them now. Are you all able to see those?
Yes, we can see them.
Very good. Yeah, add other comments in the chat too. We'll definitely look at those, and just wanted to have some time for you to provide some input. So thanks everybody, and thank you, Don.
Folks, if you have any questions for Don or Scott, feel free to raise your hand. And we also had a few in the chat.
Okay, so again, thanks to Scott and Don. And as Susan said, we're ready for questions if you have any. If you can just put those into the chat, that's probably the best way to do it. And Doesn't appear we have any yet in the chat. Oh, Marcia Porter Norton has a question. She raised her hand. Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, I just, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm interested from Don and Scott, would love to get your take on this too. I see that the way our region is growing and the fact we have so many commuters because housing prices are so high in Durango, what are opportunities to work at the county level on these concepts that we're talking about? And also, the Regional Housing Alliance, as all of you know, is restarted. We're hopefully very close to hiring a consulting firm, actually 2 firms, and would be happy to come back to the Green Business Roundtable once we get lined out on our activities this year. But I'm just curious about the role of counties.
Scott, I can answer it in theory, but Scott, you're going to give a much more on the ground answer.
Yeah, go for it, Don, and I'll follow you up.
Oh, well, the short answer is some of the best managed places are agreements, places that have development agreements between the county and the city as to where they're willing to extend infrastructure and growth and where they're not. They're not easy to negotiate. They're upsetting to people because I'm working in Boise, Idaho right now, where there's been a long-standing agreement between Boise and Ada County. And they agree. They know where they're going to do growth and where they're not going to do growth, which helps reduce infrastructure costs. It helps guide the conversation, because if you're not going to sprawl into inefficient areas, then you're going to have to accept more density in the city. That doesn't mean that people like it, but it means they've made some rational decisions about where they're going to do it. But it also is difficult because people move in from California, Texas, choose your place and say, well, I wasn't part of that agreement. I don't agree with that. And the answer is, it's an agreement. And so it is highly recommended in general when you can get the county and the city to agree. Larimer County and Fort Collins have had longstanding agreements. There are various places around the state where you basically say, we hereby shake hands and agree we are going to not do some inefficient things or some things that increase wildfire risk, and we're going to agree to pay the price, which is that neighborhood character is going to change more in some places than it would otherwise.
I would add Commissioner Porter Norton. I think the county's in a unique position and has definitely been doing this in the recent past to facilitate more regional conversations. And, RHA is a great example of that, but also just, bringing the different municipalities together, different special districts, and identifying what those interrelations are. Like you said, transportation, land use, as Don pointed out, on the fringe of municipalities. And then, groups like Region 9 obviously bring a broader regional perspective, but I've been impressed recently with the county's leadership on facilitating those conversations and getting entities out of their silos and starting to have more regional approaches. So that's what I would say.
And we did have a couple of questions in the chat during the presentation. The first one, it's probably best for you, Scott. Is anyone considering converting empty commercial space like the Worldpay or part of the Durango Mall into workforce housing?
Yeah, the Worldpay building has sold. We've had some preliminary conversations with an architect about conversion of that space to, I think, predominantly residential, but also has some commercial components to it. So like we heard, mixed use development, and then putting on that massive surface parking lot kind of beyond the mall overlooking the river, there is a desire to add some housing back there. I don't think that's going to be in the affordable range, but we are having conversations about how do we integrate some more density back there and make it affordable or attainable by nature. The conversion, though, is definitely something that is being pursued by the new owners.
I would just add that in case people aren't aware, the governor's office has been doing an initiative to try to bring together builders, financing folks, zoning people, and try to figure out what if there are barriers at the state level that the state could remove to allow the kind of natural conversion over from obsolete commercial or unused office into residential. This is one of those areas where zoning is the easy question. And most of the clients we work with who rewrite their codes just remove the barriers. If you're in a commercial district, it becomes a mixed use district, you can convert it. You don't need a special approval for that. You may have parking requirements. You clearly have building code requirements, which can throw big barriers in your way, but the zoning itself gets out of the way for doing that. So, and we're seeing a fair amount of that. I'll just gratuitously offer, sometimes, especially in Colorado, I get answers, well, that'll really hurt our property taxes. That'll really hurt us if we have too much, if we allow people to go from commercial to residential zoning. And I don't want to be flip about this, but you can't make obsolete commercial be occupied by refusing to rezone it. You can't make the housing crisis go away by denying that you need more housing in whatever structures you have. So the bottom line is that the tax tail can't be wagging the dog on this stuff. The tax system is going to have to adjust to the realities that America has way too much commercial zoning and way too little residential zoning, and that's going to adjust. And as it has all through history, the tax system will adjust to reflect that reality eventually.
Susan, did you get the other question? I know Lynn has a question in the chat. Or I can get it. Let me find it and I'll ask it. This is a question to both of you from Lynn Bruzis, or it is, where does coexistence with other community residents, meaning wildlife, factor into this scheme? For example, potentially creating overpasses and underpasses that accommodate wildlife and reduce the risk of wildlife vehicle collisions.
Scott, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, Durango's done a great job of, preserving open space, close proximity to, the urban core. We have partnerships with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. There's, things like wildlife closures on open space in close proximity. So I think those things are happening. We just had 2 massive bucks outside our front door, on our office door, right next to Camino. So I think there's definitely efforts to do that, and I think primarily around open space preservation.
We had a couple questions about modular housing co-ops, if they're a viable option to create communities.
So I think there are 2 different questions in there. Just my personal opinion, then Scott can jump in. Modular housing is coming, guys. Anything that will hold down the cost of housing is coming. And most codes do not distinguish. They say, if you meet the building code, you meet the building code. And we don't care whether you put it in a factory or put it on site or built it in modules and did it together. Doesn't matter. And that's by far the dominant trend around the country. If it meets a safety code, it's a house, and that's fine. So the other one is co-op, and that's an ownership form. But in fact, I think the zoning part of it is, often you can reduce development costs if people are on one site. You're not requiring them to subdivide. We have rigorous subdivision regulations, because once you buy a lot and you have a house or you have a building and it enters the private market, the buyers down the chain who buy from each other over time need to know it's real. It's a real lot. It has services. It has access. It has utilities. It has easements. I'm not buying something that's unserviceable and unaccessible. That takes regulations. That's why we have subdivision regulations, and they're often a bit cumbersome. When you say, I will let you build a community on one site, whether it is modular, whether it is tiny homes, whether it's manufactured housing, and I will adjust the standards of the roads you have to get into and out of, and the width of the utilities, because I'm going to treat this as one thing, not a lot that is going to be bought and sold in the private market, but a piece of land that has been laid out safely and efficiently. And you can sell your individual unit, but this land is not going to go anywhere until it goes as a whole. We're not going to make you subdivide. that can reduce costs very significantly. And so I think we're going to see more and more solutions that do that, that whether you call it a co-op or whether you call it a multi-building development or whether you call it an RV park, things that avoid the cost of subdividing by saying this is an ownership opportunity like a condo, but a ground level condo. It's not a subdivision and you can't buy and sell the land on which your unit is sold separate from your unit. I think that's going to come. Yes, I think it's a good idea.
We have a few developments right now, higher density residential that are looking at modular construction, 3-4 stories. So the technology, I think, and the capabilities advancing really quickly. We have heard there's significant backlogs, I guess, just like everything else in the building supply chain. And there's been some discussions about could we facilitate a local or a regional production facility in Southwest Colorado? Could we bring in a factory that would help produce modular units? And so that's a really exciting, a lot of benefits there, from economic development to sustainability, from transportation impacts. So hopefully more to come on that. And the Arkansas Valley, Buena Vista has a firm that's really ramping up production. And so had some initial conversations with them about bringing that production capability down into Southwest Colorado.
Okay, Dawn, I think you have to take off as well. So, and we thank you so much for your participation today, for your presentation. That was great. We do have one brief announcement. I know we have one more question or maybe a couple in the chat, but let's let Lori Dixon do her announcement so we can stay on our schedule. So go ahead, Lori.
Hi, everybody. Just thank you very much, Dawn. That was really, really an informative presentation. Just wanted to mention one, energy efficiency and how important that is for affordability. And we have a couple of programs that can help both renters and owners with free energy efficiency upgrades. The other announcement is we are launching next month, hopefully by the end of the month, the Green Business Certification Program with the City of Durango. And it's fairly extensive in terms of in terms of all the points that you're going to achieve as a business. So we're working on that. And I just wanted to mention that we'll be open for businesses to participate in the certification process. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you, Lori. As I said, we have our tradition of shutting down at 1, and thank you again, Don. I know you got to go. So
I got to go. Okay, thank you for inviting me.
You bet. Thank you. Take care. And so I think we're going to shut it down there. I know there were a couple other questions in the chat. If Scott, if you wanted to entertain those, if you can, or if you have other things and you can't, but there were 2 questions, one from Kyle Hansen and one from Dominic May, or 2 from Dominic, perhaps. So are you able to do that, Scott? Do you want to give that a shot or not?
I'd say out of respect for time, we'd be happy to come back and talk more, or either of those individuals happy to talk to you offline.
Okay. All right.
I wrote those questions down. I'll send them to you, Scott, and from the people that had them.
And sorry, just finding myself here. Just wanted to give a shout out again to our sponsors. Oops. So again, our premier sponsor is First Southwest Bank. Other sponsors include LPA, Drea Presley at Edward Jones, Maria's Bookshop, Phoenix Recycling, Alpine Bank, City of Durango, Durango Land and Homes, Local First, Durango Nursery and Supply, the Payroll Department, the Powerhouse Science Center, SolarWorks, and Mantell Heckathorn Builders. Again, our next Green Business Roundtable will be on March 9th, and that is going to be the sustainability initiatives with the 9R school district. So thank you all for participating today, and hope to see you again next month at our next Green Business Roundtable. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Take care.